All right, in this video I want to discuss the 5E lesson plan assignment. This is pretty much what it sounds like. So this is a written lesson plan. It is different than the teaching demonstration. In the teaching demonstration in class, I will be looking at what you do during the lesson. Here I am only looking at what is on paper. And so those two things are, in my mind, two separate things: how well you write a lesson plan and how well you carry out the lesson plan. So there are two different things. Here we'll focus on just the lesson plan. All right, to that end, there is a rubric that we'll look at here in a moment. People often ask how much detail is needed in it. Enough detail that when someone reads it, they can visualize what the teacher is doing and what the students are doing. So I would say a decent level of detail is needed for this lesson plan. All right, so there's a couple areas in the rubric. It is a very detailed rubric. You can see at the bottom of the page here when we get there that I have borrowed this from some research that's been done. And so this tool's been used by other people as well. So it's very detail oriented. The first sort of section here is looking at standards and objectives. You will link to and Next Generation Science Standard. You will provide a detailed objective that is clear, appropriate, and measurable. That is something beyond students will be able to understand, but how do we know that they understand? Something that is we can observe or measure. And so it could be, having students list something or write something or solve a problem, something that we can measure. And then as you'll see on the rubric, there's a place for you to include all the materials. I'll talk about that when we get to that section. All right, there are obviously 5 parts to the 5E lesson plan. In class, we've already talked about the first 2. You've done a 2E, where you've thought a good bit about engaging students and moving them into the Explorer. So here we will just move on either with that topic or with a completely new topic and extend it to all 5 sections of the 5E. Okay, so in the Engage, we'll be trying to figure out what students already know about the topic. We will be trying to motivate them and get them interested in the topic, and so you can see that that's the second item here. There should be an opportunity for students to ask questions and for there to be a discussion during the Engage. And then what you'll see in pretty much between all of these 5Es is trying to determine how well, and this is really for you to think about, how well you can segue students from the Engage to the Explorer, right? So the Engage should lead directly into the exploration. Students should be able to follow that. It shouldn't need a big explanation of how we're getting from this part of the lesson to the next part. It should be seamless. In the Explorer, the students will have the opportunity to do activities that are hands-on or minds-on. Does not necessarily need to be hands-on, depending on the topic. Sometimes it cannot be hands-on. But the student should be actively engaged. It should be student-centered. And then there should be some way for you to see how well students are doing on the activity. So whether it's a worksheet or you're just observing how they do on a lab or through discussions, whatever it happens to be, some way for you to get a sense of whether the students are picking up on the ideas, whether they have some misconceptions, whether they have the correct conception or have developed some misinformation. Again, the exploration is a time for students to try to figure out how things work. You're not going to tell students how things work until a little bit later in the lesson. So in the Explorer, the students will be trying to figure things out. And then once they've done that, they will be moving to the Explain, where the students explain what they found out, which may or may not align with what the current scientific thinking is. So 2 things will happen in the Explain. The students will share what they've learned, and then the teacher will fill in any missing gaps to make sure that by the end of the Explain, as you can see in here, the students have a complete explanation of the concept. Okay, so that's the key. So in the Explorer, students may not have the complete explanation, but by the time the Explain part of the lesson is over, you should be reasonably certain that students can meet the objective. Okay, so again, the first thing on the rubric is a logical transition from the Explorer to the Explain. Teacher will be using questions to guide student thinking along. So this does not have to be, probably should not be, teacher-centered. It shouldn't be a lecture. It should be a discussion. It should be the teacher using questions to move student thinking forward. The fourth part of the explain rubric is that the lesson provides a variety of approaches. Okay, so this might be that you are, again, through guiding questions, leading student thinking along, providing a statement that summarizes what students should know or be able to do, what they have learned. It may be including also video clips that show or illustrate the concept. It may be showing pictures that illustrate the concept. Students may be reading excerpts. All of those things combined. So multiple approaches to explain the topic. All right, and then obviously there should be some discussion there between the teacher and the students. Okay. All right, and then once we get to elaborate, some people view the elaborate as a part to diverge into a new topic. It is not that. It is an extension of what we have already done. So this lesson that you are developing should be very narrow and very specific. So for example, you may do an entire lesson on monohybrid crosses. All right? And so if you're doing something on monohybrid crosses, the elaborate is not to push students to do dihybrid. It's to make sure that they can do independently monohybrid crosses, right? And to make it as real life an example as possible. So we may start the lesson off with some kind of analogy or some kind of activity that's not directly science oriented, and by the time we get to the explain, we're talking specifically about the science. And then here in the elaborate, you want students to have the opportunity to apply what they've learned. Okay, but not to extend to a new topic. All right, and as you kind of have seen, you are doing formative assessments through those first 4 E's. But at the end, by the end of the lesson, you want to have a summative evaluation. So what I would take that to mean is the summative assessment is something that you will put into the gradebook. Okay, so earlier in the lesson, students may not have a good understanding of the topic. In the Explorer, students may not, for example, to go back to the monohybrid cross, be able to accurately solve monohybrid crosses. You're trying to figure out, how they're thinking about how those concepts, work. By the time you finish the elaborate, you should be pretty certain that students could do those problems by themselves. And so now you're ready to put something in the gradebook. You won't want to put something in the gradebook where you're uncertain if students can actually do that thing, right? The odds of them getting sufficient grades would be pretty low. So the evaluate includes a summative evaluation at that point. It should match the objectives. So again, we want to stick to a very narrow focus here and make sure that the evaluation is aligned to the objective that you said was the objective for the lesson and doesn't deviate from that. The last 2 parts of the evaluate are things to watch out for. Sometimes people aren't sure what this means, even though it's on the rubric, so I want to make sure I'm clear about it. The criteria are clear and appropriate. In other words, you want to have very clear, easy to answer questions. All right, I know it sounds like you're probably nodding your head. Yes, I definitely do that. But the act of writing a clear and well-written question is not as easy as we often think. So for that reason, you may borrow some of these questions from published sources. But the key here is to make sure that the rubric, how you grade that, aligns very well with the question. And so there's 2 ways to think about that. One, the student should know exactly what you mean by the question and what would be considered an appropriate response to it. And if another teacher was to grade this, they should be reasonably able to score it the same way. So this becomes less difficult if it's something like a true, false, or multiple choice question. As you move into short answer responses or essays, it becomes a little bit more difficult to assure that 2 teachers would grade the same response the same way. And so that's where a detailed rubric is really needed. If it is a multiple choice question, then you want to think about why the answer that you've marked it to be the correct answer is the correct answer and why the other options are not. And so you want to be able to articulate that as well. All right, and then the final part of the rubric is there's a couple of things here. Anywhere that safety needs to be addressed, just make sure that you make statements of that, whether it's students needing to wear appropriate eyewear, whatever it happens to be, that you cover that. You will provide all of the materials with the lesson plan. So we'll go over the lesson plan template here in a moment, but any handouts, notes, worksheets, lab activities, drill questions, exit tickets, all those things you will attach as well. So anything you refer to in the lesson plan, you will attach. You will give some thought to how much time you will spend in each of those 5 E's, and we'll see that there's a place to do that on the lesson plan. And you will make accommodations for students with special needs. So thinking broadly about this now, because you don't have an exact class that you're thinking of, but think about students that might need extra time, students that might be, for example, visually impaired or hearing impaired, and what you might do to help those students learn. And then finally, the lesson plan does include a section for a bibliography on the template, and so this is a place for you to cite anywhere that you've got information, whether it's links to websites, textbooks, YouTube videos. You may have gotten elements of the lesson from a ScienceScope article. You'll include all that stuff there. Okay, so now a quick look at the template here. I'll show you why I like this template when we get near the end, but it's got pretty detail oriented. So there's a section for the teacher, the date, and the school. If you have a school that you're working with, you can put the name of that there, otherwise some sort of fictitious name. The unit where this lesson would be a part of, a descriptive lesson title that'll help you as you're looking through your files know exactly what this is. So we try to stay away from titles that are cute and more descriptive titles. Obviously, you'll include the whole Next Generation Science Standard here. The objective, which I think is more for you as the teacher, what you want students to know or be able to do. And then more for the students is the inquiry or guiding question. So this is a question that will guide the lesson that you can display to the students to keep them on track and know what it is they're supposed to know or be able to do. A list of all the materials and handouts that you will need for the lesson, and that's just for you as you're preparing, so that you make sure that you make all the copies you need and have all the materials to do the activities. Then there's a section which is just a really general, and I've put some ideas of things in here. You can omit these, you can add to them if you need. These are just sort of general adaptations and modifications for students that may have IEPs or 504 plans. And then you see each of the 5 E's, and here's where the time stamp will go. So if you think the engagement's going to take 10 minutes, you'd write 10 minutes in there, and so on. So you can decide how long the lesson is. If it's a middle school, it might be a 50-minute lesson. If it's high school, it might be an hour and a half. So you can think about that. And then you will write in here, and again, you can expand any of these boxes. Just make sure that the text isn't cut off at the bottom. It is a Word document, so you can do that pretty easily. On the right side is the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. I've put a couple things in here as a placeholder, but you will want to change those if those are not accurate. And then here is the references and credits, or the bibliography section. This is where you'll give credit to any sources where you borrowed information. Followed by the dimensions of learning. This has kind of fallen out of favor in education in most counties, so I'm okay if you don't fill this out or if you just completely omit it. And then there are 2 sections at the bottom, reflections and areas for improvement. You will not be completing these sections, but why I like this lesson plan template is if you were going to go and interview with someone, this would be something that they would want to see, that you have thought about how the students did on the assignment in terms of their scores, and then you've given additional thought to what you might improve or change the next time you did the lesson. So I think this is something that you might put in your own portfolio as an example of a well-written lesson plan. Again, the bulk of it is going to be right here, and that's where you want to be as detail-oriented as you can, thinking very specifically about what you'll be doing and what the students will be doing, and adjusting the size of the boxes to provide as many details as you can. Okay, so give this all a look over, and we will discuss it further in class, and I can answer any questions at that time, or feel free to reach out and email me with questions.